He vanished without a sound. No barking, no struggle, just an open gate and an empty yard. For 2 days, Keanu Reeves searched every corner of Los Angeles for his beloved rescue dog. But when a stranger finally returned him, what he revealed about the dog's journey left Keanu completely speechless. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights of the city still shimmered faintly against the dark sky as Keanu pulled into the driveway of his modest, tree-shaded home in the Hollywood Hills. It was just past midnight. A late shoot had stretched longer than expected, and all he wanted now was a shower, a warm drink, and the eager greeting of his loyal companion, Atlas. For nearly 5 years, Atlas, a striking black and brown shepherd mix with deep amber eyes, had been more than just a pet. He was family. A rescue from a shelter outside of San Bernardino, Atlas had once been found tied to a chain behind a foreclosed house. Malnourished, skittish, and silent. But Keanu had seen something in him. Something broken but brave. It was the same quiet resilience Keanu understood too well. Normally, as soon as Keanu's car door clicked shut, he could hear the soft thump of paws racing down the hall, followed by the scratch of claws on hardwood and that unmistakable, excited whine. But tonight, there was nothing. No paws, no bark, no Atlas. Keanu stepped through the front door, calling out gently, "Atlas, I'm home, buddy." The silence inside was immediate and cold. He tried again, a little louder. Still no response. He walked into the kitchen, then to the living room, scanning the usual corners where Atlas sometimes dozed off waiting. His food bowl sat untouched. Water dish full, blanket folded neatly in the corner where the dog curled up every night. But no sign of Atlas. Keanu's stomach dropped. He checked the sliding glass door to the backyard. Locked. Then moved quickly through the hallway, past his home office, into the guest room, and finally out onto the back patio. And there it was. The gate. Wide open. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't left it open. His assistant, Julia, would never have either. That gate had a spring-loaded latch, one that stayed shut unless pushed hard from the inside. He rushed down the stone path that ran along the garden wall, calling for Atlas again, louder this time. "Atlas, come here, boy. Atlas." Still nothing. His voice echoed into the night, unanswered. Back inside, he grabbed his phone and texted Julia. "Is Atlas with you?" The typing dots appeared within seconds. Then came the reply. "No." "Why, is something wrong?" Panic fully bloomed now. Keanu darted into the security room near his garage. Several monitors showed the last 24 hours of footage from various points around the property. He rewound the camera feed by the back gate. Hours of playback rolled by, still no sign of movement. And then he noticed something. Not someone taking Atlas, but something far stranger. There was no footage of him leaving at all. Keanu stared at the monitor, replaying the footage in slow motion. From 7 p.m. to midnight, the camera had been rolling without interruption. Birds flew across the screen, garden lights flickered with the breeze, and a neighborhood cat darted across the fence. But not once did Atlas appear. No barking, no struggle, no shadow slipping out. It was as if the dog had simply evaporated. Julia arrived 10 minutes later, still in her hoodie and slippers, her eyes wide with worry. She brought her laptop to pull up the synced cloud footage, hoping maybe the exterior motion sensors had picked up something the interior cameras missed. "I checked the front door cam too," she said. Nothing, not a soul came in or out. Keanu walked outside again, flashlight in hand, and scanned the backyard in long, slow sweeps. The grass was slightly damp from the sprinklers, but near the back fence, just under a small rose bush, he saw something odd. A single paw print, slightly smeared, facing outward. Keanu crouched down. This wasn't here last night. he muttered. They checked the perimeter. The gate's latch wasn't broken, but it had been tampered with. There were faint scratches near the bolt, almost as if someone had wedged it open carefully, not enough to break it, just enough to slip through. "There's no forced entry," Julia whispered, staring at the gate. But this wasn't an accident. Keanu rubbed his temples, his heart pounding. He wouldn't run away. Not Atlas. Not after what he's been through. He wasn't just saying that. Atlas had never even tried to step off the curb without Keanu's lead. He slept beside his door, followed him room to room. During tough days of filming or personal storms, it was Atlas who grounded him, resting his head on Keanu's knee, refusing to leave his side. This wasn't a flighty pet disappearing. This was a partner, a soul tethered to his. They canvassed the neighborhood until 3 a.m., walking the sidewalks with a flashlight and dog treats, calling out into alleyways and parks. No one had seen him. No one had heard anything. By dawn, the house felt colder than usual. The bed felt hollow without the dog curled near the foot of it. Keanu lay awake, one hand dangling over the side, as if still expecting a cold nose to nudge his fingers. But the only thing that greeted him that morning was silence. And that silence was deafening. Something was wrong. Very wrong. He knew dogs got lost. He knew it happened every day. But not like this. Not without a sound. Not without a trace. Not with security systems active and cameras rolling. And as he sat by the back gate again, staring at the empty yard, Keanu's mind turned to the most haunting question of all. If Atlas didn't run away, who or what had taken him? Keanu didn't sleep that day. He sat in the kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through every local shelter website, every lost pet listing. Julia brought him coffee, but he barely touched it. His eyes stayed fixed on the screen, jaw clenched, fingers tapping anxiously. By noon, he had already printed dozens of flyers. They featured Atlas's photo, ears perked, tongue out, bright eyes, and a clear message: missing, no questions asked, please help bring him home. He didn't mention his name. He didn't want the attention. All he wanted was the dog back. They drove through the Hollywood Hills, Westwood, and Echo Park, plastering flyers on lamp posts, coffee shop windows, gas stations, and even church bulletin boards. Keanu moved methodically, quietly, avoiding eye contact with strangers. Only a few recognized him, but none asked for autographs. His face looked drawn, hollow. Something about his expression made people step aside, whispering after he left. By evening, Keanu got a call from an elderly woman near Griffith Park. She'd seen a dog like Atlas running near a drainage tunnel. He rushed over within minutes, but the dog was gone. That night, a soft rain fell, and the sky over Los Angeles turned a deep gray. Keanu stood outside again, staring at the open gate like it might speak. Julia joined him, umbrella in hand, watching him in silence. "I keep thinking," he finally said, his voice hoarse. "What if he's out there waiting for me? What if he thinks I gave up?" Julia placed a hand on his shoulder. "He knows you. He knows your heart." Keanu didn't reply, but inside, a gnawing fear took root. Out of loss, of betrayal. Atlas had been by his side through everything: the grief of his past, the long nights on set, the aching loneliness that still sometimes crept in despite fame and fortune. He had promised that dog a safe home, a quiet life filled with kindness. And now, it felt like he'd failed. As midnight approached, Keanu did one last sweep of the neighborhood, driving slowly with the windows down, calling Atlas's name through the rain. Nothing, only the sound of tires on wet pavement and the faint buzz of power lines overhead. Back home, he sat on the couch, soaked and exhausted. The leash still hung by the door. The food bowl remained untouched. The house, once filled with little background sounds, panting, nails on hardwood, a low bark at the door, was now oppressively quiet. And then, Just before he finally got up to go to bed, Julia's voice came from the hallway. "Keanu," she said cautiously, "you need to see this." He turned. She was holding her phone. Her face was pale. She pressed play on a short video just uploaded to a private neighborhood group. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. Atlas was alive. And he wasn't alone. Keanu hadn't planned to adopt a dog. It was a rainy Tuesday in Los Angeles, the kind of gray that soaked into your bones. He was driving back from a charity reading event, the traffic crawling, the windshield wipers ticking out a rhythm of loneliness. That's when he saw the shape. A small, trembling body huddled near the concrete divider on the freeway off-ramp. At first, he thought it was just debris, but something made him stop. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way the rain seemed to pause for just a second as he pulled over. Keanu stepped out, jacket already drenched, and approached the creature cautiously. It was a dog, barely breathing, covered in dirt and dried blood, one paw twisted unnaturally. Its eyes, one brown, one a ghostly blue, met his, and something passed between them. Not fear, not pain, recognition. He wrapped the dog in his jacket, whispering soothing words the whole way to the emergency vet. The technicians said the shepherd mix had likely been abused and dumped. They weren't sure he'd make it through the night, but Keanu stayed. He sat on the floor of the clinic beside the kennel, head bowed, hand resting near the cage. Morning came, and the dog was still breathing, still fighting. They let Keanu name him. He called him Atlas. The first weeks were tough. Atlas flinched at sudden movements, cried in his sleep, and refused to eat unless Keanu was sitting close. But Keanu was patient. He adjusted his life around the dog's recovery, canceled trips, rearranged film meetings, even postponed a shoot in Europe. Friends asked him why he was going to such lengths. Keanu always gave the same answer. He was thrown away. I won't let him feel that again. They walked miles together in the mornings, Atlas slowly learning to trust the leash, the world, and himself. At night, they sat on the porch as Keanu read scripts aloud. Sometimes Atlas would rest his head on Keanu's foot and let out a sigh that sounded almost human. The timing of Atlas's arrival was no accident. Just 2 months earlier, Keanu had lost a close friend in a motorcycle crash. The grief had pulled him inward. He was eating less, sleeping even less, and drifting through his days on autopilot. But Atlas didn't let him stay in that space for long. The dog demanded walks, play, presence. Healing wasn't instant, but it was real. Keanu once said in an interview that Atlas taught him to breathe again. He doesn't ask questions. He doesn't pretend to understand. He just stays. Sometimes, that's all you need. Atlas became more than a companion. He became an anchor. Over time, Atlas's presence changed the energy of Keanu's entire home. Friends and visitors noticed it immediately. The way the dog followed Keanu from room to room, never more than a few feet away, like a silent guardian. He wasn't loud or demanding. He simply watched, waited, and loved, with the kind of quiet loyalty that never needed to be spoken. When Keanu would return from long film shoots, it was Atlas who greeted him first. Not with wild barking or frantic excitement, but with a gentle thump of the tail and those mismatched eyes that said, "You're back. I never doubted you would be." In the mornings, they had a ritual. Keanu would brew his coffee and step out onto the patio. Atlas would trot beside him and sit without command. They would watch the sunrise together. Sometimes Keanu would talk to him about the roles he was offered, the parts he turned down, or the memories that still haunted him. Atlas listened, unjudging. In those moments, Keanu felt like he was talking to someone who had known him long before the world ever did. But perhaps the most unforgettable moment came one night, about a year after the adoption. Keanu was invited to a high-profilocity charity gala and he brought Atlas along, against the event's formal dress code. People stared, some whispered, but Keanu didn't care. He introduced Atlas to everyone as his healer. Toward the end of the night, an elderly woman approached and knelt beside Atlas. She said, "There's something in his eyes, like he's been where we've all been, but came back wiser." Keanu nodded. He understood exactly what she meant. Atlas became something of a quiet legend, not a celebrity pet splashed across tabloids, but a presence that people remembered after meeting him just once. There was something grounding about him. People in Keanu's circle began calling him the monk with fur. He reminded everyone of the sacredness in stillness, in loyalty, and in enduring love. Keanu once told a reporter, off the record, that Atlas saved him. "I was in free fall. I didn't want anyone around, not even myself. But this dog, he anchored me. He didn't ask me to heal. He just waited until I did." That's why when Atlas went missing, it wasn't just the loss of a pet. It felt like the world had gone off balance again. This wasn't just a missing dog. It was the vanishing of a soul who had once pulled Keanu back from the edge. The fear wasn't just about danger, it was about debt. The emotional kind. The unspoken promise that Keanu had made to Atlas the night he rescued him. "I won't let you be alone again." Now, for the first time in years, that promise felt shattered. And somewhere out there, Atlas was alone. Keanu couldn't sleep that night. He stayed up watching old home videos, simple clips on his phone, most of them never meant to be shared. There was one where Atlas was just a skinny pup, awkwardly chasing a tennis ball across the yard, tripping over his own paws. Another showed him curled at Keanu's feet as he read aloud from a film script, practicing lines late into the night. One clip made Keanu pause longer than the rest. It was from the winter after his best friend passed away, snow falling lightly. Keanu was sitting alone on the porch steps, lost in thought. Atlas approached slowly, then sat beside him, pressing his body close. They didn't move for minutes, just silence, breath, warmth. Keanu remembered how that moment had felt, like someone had stitched a thread through his chest and gently pulled him back into the world. Now that presence was gone. In the days that followed the adoption, Keanu had learned that Atlas had once belonged to someone cruel. The rescue volunteers said the dog had been kicked out of a moving vehicle and found limping along the side of a highway. He had burns on his neck from a chain collar, and scars that told stories no one ever wanted to imagine. But even then, Atlas had wagged his tail when a stranger offered him food. He had followed Keanu into the car without hesitation, like he already knew his life was about to change. Keanu never understood how a creature so broken could still trust so fully. It was something he admired deeply and feared he might never match. That trust was sacred. And now, as he replayed those memories, Keanu knew he wasn't just searching for a missing dog. He was searching for a piece of himself, the part that believed in quiet goodness, in second chances, in healing without words. The bond between them had been forged not through commands and obedience, but through shared silence, through long walks under starlight, through nights of grief where neither needed to speak. Keanu had once said to a friend, "He listens better than most people I know." Atlas had been the keeper of Keanu's quietest truths. And that's what hurt most now. Not knowing if he was scared, not knowing if he was hungry, not knowing if the world once again had betrayed the creature who had already endured too much. Keanu pressed his palm to the window that overlooked the backyard. The gate still swung slightly in the breeze, the way it had the night Atlas disappeared. He whispered one line, barely audible, "I'm not giving up on you." And in that moment he made a vow, not just to find Atlas, but to repay the debt of love that had once saved his life. By sunrise the next morning, Keanu was already back in motion. Sleep hadn't come, only pacing. He stood in the kitchen holding a stack of freshly printed flyers, black and white sheets with Atlas's face, name, and a short message beneath it. Missing, friendly, deep scar on right ear. Please call if seen. He stapled the first one to the post outside his gate, then the next to a stop sign at the corner. Soon he was driving through the streets of Los Angeles, methodically taping flyers to poles in West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Echo Park. Each intersection felt like a chance. Each new lamppost, a new hope. Keanu didn't wear anything flashy, no tailored jacket, no sunglasses, just an old hoodie, jeans, and a ball cap pulled low. In most places, no one recognized him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. The grief was too raw to share. This wasn't a headline, this was a personal ache, one he carried silently, pressing forward, step by step, block by block. He stopped at every animal shelter within a 20-mile radius. Some workers blinked in surprise when they saw who he was, but he didn't acknowledge it. He handed over flyers and quietly asked the same questions. Any new dogs brought in overnight? Anyone report finding a shepherd mix? The answers were always the same. Sorry, no, but we'll keep an eye out. Keanu thanked them with a nod, then moved on to the next. At one small shelter in Highland Park, a volunteer with dyed blue hair paused and looked at him more closely. You okay? She asked gently, sensing something beneath the surface. Keanu smiled faintly. Not really, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. She reached for the flyer and pinned it on their community board. We'll help. That small kindness mattered more than she could have known. By the second night, Keanu started joining Facebook groups under a pseudonym, Unjust Another User, in local lost and found pet communities. He uploaded Atlas's photo. He read dozens of posts from strangers searching for lost cats and dogs. Every now and then he'd see a hopeful comment. Someone claiming to have seen a similar dog in a park or alley, but none matched the distinct details. No scar, no collar, no Atlas. Still, he followed every lead. He drove at 2 a.m. to a gas station on Melrose after someone mentioned a stray shepherd roaming near the dumpsters. It wasn't Atlas. He waited outside a park in Silver Lake after a man posted about a tan dog near the tennis courts. Again, not him. Each time hope rose, then cracked. But Keanu didn't stop. He moved silently through alleyways behind restaurants, pausing to listen for whines or barks. He left food near trash bins and old blankets at bus stops, just in case Atlas was seeking warmth. There was no map for this search, only love and desperation. By the third day, the city began to blur into patterns. Mailboxes, street corners, barking dogs behind fences. Keanu was moving on instinct more than logic now. Every sound made him turn. Every glimpse of movement made his heart jolt. His assistant, Jordan, had been texting updates from a central map they were compiling of sightings, but most were false alarms. Still, Keanu followed them all. One tip led him into a construction zone downtown, where a shepherd had been seen dodging traffic. Workers pointed him toward a nearby underpass. Keanu parked, jumped the chain-link fence, and climbed down the embankment. The noise of the freeway above roared in his ears. "Atlas?" he called gently. Silence. He crouched low and held out his hand. Nothing stirred in the shadows, just the distant echo of rubber tires on concrete. He sat there for nearly an hour, waiting, listening, letting the stillness answer. When he finally stood and turned back, he was covered in grime. But even then, he walked slowly, just in case a familiar shape appeared behind him. Later that evening, Jordan tried to talk him into taking a break. "Keanu, just one night to sleep. You're running on fumes." Keanu looked at him and quietly replied, "He wouldn't stop for me." That was all he needed to say. The emotional toll was mounting. In quieter moments, Keanu would catch himself imagining the worst. Atlas, scared, hungry, hurt, or worse. Those thoughts came like waves, crashing harder with each hour that passed. But every time they threatened to break him, he forced himself to focus. Atlas had survived worse before. He was resilient. He was clever. He had that scrappy heart Keanu had seen the day they first met, and Keanu clung to that image like a lifeline. He started using his connections, discreetly. He called a retired police friend who worked with canine units. He reached out to a private tracker who specialized in missing pets. They asked for hair samples, familiar items, scent trails. Keanu gathered Atlas's old toy, his leash, even an unwashed hoodie he always loved to lay on. The tracker warned him it could take days, maybe longer, but they agreed to start canvassing areas where the tips had clustered, especially near a rundown industrial district just east of Chinatown. Meanwhile, Keanu returned to the shelters. A few workers greeted him like a regular now. One even offered him coffee. He declined, then stared long at the cages. So many lost animals. So many silent stories. And still, no sign of the one he'd come to find. He sat in his car that night, hands gripping the steering wheel, head bowed. On the seat beside him was a photo of Atlas. His big eyes, floppy ears, that old scar like a badge of survival. Keanu whispered, "Just hang on." At dawn on the fourth day, Keanu found himself back at Griffith Park. The city was just beginning to stir, but he had barely slept. He sat on a bench overlooking the hills, holding Atlas's old collar in his hands. The leather was worn, the name tag scratched, but the jingle of it still felt like a heartbeat to him. He closed his eyes and listened. Birds chirping, a jogger's footsteps, wind through the trees. Then, a sound, a small bark, far off, faint. His head snapped up. He stood, turned, listened again. But it didn't repeat. He jogged toward the sound's direction, weaving through the trails, calling Atlas's name over and over again. A few early hikers turned to look, some recognizing him, most just startled by the urgency in his voice. Nothing. Just wind. Keanu stopped. His breath was ragged. His legs ached. It had been nothing. Or his mind playing tricks. But just as he turned back toward the car, a homeless woman approached. She looked to be in her 60s, wrapped in layers of mismatched sweaters. Her eyes were kind but cautious. "You looking for a shepherd?" she asked. Keanu nodded slowly, heart already racing again. She pointed toward the freeway overpass. "I saw one like that 2 nights ago. Real skittish, was limping. Slept by that corner over there, near the burnt-out van. Did you see where he went?" She shook her head. "Gone by morning, but he looked like he was trying to get home." Keanu reached into his pocket and handed her a card with Jordan's number and a generous cash tip folded inside. "Please call if you see him again." She smiled. "I hope you find him." Keanu walked the area she described for hours. He left food, an old shirt, and a water bowl behind the van. He placed another flyer at the nearby intersection. Nothing yet, but it was something, a direction. That night, Keanu returned home briefly to rest, but he didn't go inside. He sat outside the house with the porch light on, just in case. He played an old voicemail where Atlas had barked in the background. The sound filled the air like a ghost. Jordan arrived around midnight with updates from the tracker. A few scent hits matched near the area of the woman's sighting. It was the best lead they'd had. They made a plan to focus there at first light, setting humane traps, placing cameras, and staying close. As Keanu finally closed his eyes, leaning against the house wall, he whispered to the darkness, "Just let him come home." And in the stillness, beneath the weight of fatigue and hope, he dreamed of Atlas. Alive, strong, running back through the gate that now stayed locked at night. Tomorrow would bring another search. But for the first time in days, Keanu felt something flicker in his chest. Not peace, not yet, but maybe a thread of hope. Keanu stared at his phone in disbelief. The voicemail had come in just past 6 a.m. a scratchy, static-filled recording from a blocked number. The voice on the other end was slow, deliberate, and unmistakably weathered by age. "Your dog is safe. He came to me. You need to hear why." That was all it said. No name, no callback, no address. But in the background, just before the message ended, Keanu caught something. Street traffic, faintly, and the rhythmic clang of a distant bell. It wasn't much, but his assistant Miles replayed the audio on studio-level software and caught one key detail. A Metro bus voice announcing Whittier and Lorena, East LA. Keanu didn't hesitate. Still wearing the same dark hoodie and jeans from the day before, he grabbed his keys and drove out with no entourage, no security, and no camera crews. Just him and a singular hope that somehow, against all odds, Atlas was still alive. The drive was quiet. He gripped the wheel tighter than usual, his eyes scanning every street sign, every pedestrian, every alleyway. The streets of East LA felt both familiar and foreign. The city was full of stories, and this time he wasn't the storyteller. He was the one searching for the truth. The voicemail looped in his head. "You need to hear why." Why what? Why someone took Atlas? Why he was let go? Why a complete stranger suddenly cared? Keanu had been in hundreds of films, but this was different. The tension wasn't scripted. The stakes weren't imagined. His heart raced, not with fear, but with something worse. Hope. He parked along a curb near an aging row of buildings with metal-grated storefronts. The sky was overcast, and the morning felt oddly still. He kept scanning the sidewalks, looking for anything, anyone, that might give him direction. "Atlas?" he called softly as he walked block to block, half expecting to see that familiar shepherd mix trotting toward him with a tilted head and wagging tail. Nothing. The longer he walked, the more uneasy he felt. He turned a corner and approached a small food stand just opening for the day. A woman with a soft accent greeted him. "Looking for someone?" she asked gently. Keanu nodded, holding up a printed flyer of Atlas. "My dog. He's missing." She squinted, took the paper, and then her eyes softened. "That dog, I think I saw him, with a man 2 blocks down near the church." Hope surged in his chest. He thanked her and took off without hesitation, jogging across cracked sidewalks and faded crosswalks, ignoring the burn in his legs and the tightness in his throat. He wasn't going to stop, not now. And just as he reached the next corner, he saw it, a silhouette sitting on a low concrete step. And next to him, a flash of familiar fur. Keanu's breath caught in his throat. The dog was facing away from him, but there was no mistaking that salt and pepper coat, the proud ears, the way the tail curled ever so slightly at the tip. Atlas. The man sitting beside him looked like he hadn't slept in days. Wrinkled jeans, a threadbare jacket, skin weathered like leather. He held a styrofoam cup in both hands, trembling slightly, as if the morning cold had seeped into his bones. He didn't look up. Keanu stepped closer, careful not to startle them. "Atlas," he whispered. The dog's ears twitched. Then, slowly, Atlas turned, and in that instant, everything broke. The recognition was instant. The eyes lit up. The tail thumped wildly against the pavement. In a flash, Atlas was on his feet, bounding toward Keanu in a flurry of joy and urgency. Keanu knelt as Atlas leaped into his arms, whining and licking his face, as if apologizing for ever leaving. Keanu wrapped his arms around the dog's neck and buried his face into his fur. "I've been looking everywhere for you, buddy," he murmured, his voice cracking. "Everywhere." The man rose slowly and took a step forward. "Didn't mean to keep him," he said, his voice gravelly. "He found me. Wouldn't leave." Keanu turned to him. "You left the message?" The man nodded. "Didn't know if you'd come. Figured someone like you probably got people to handle this kind of thing." "I do," Keanu said softly. but this isn't something I'd ever leave to someone else." The man looked down. "I didn't steal him, I swear. I was camped out behind the old laundromat. Woke up and he was just there, sitting next to me like we'd known each other forever." Keanu stood up, still petting Atlas. "He only does that with people he trusts." The man let out a dry laugh. "Then your dog's either got poor judgment, or he's better at seeing people than people are." There was a pause. The man looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. Keanu sensed something deeper, something the man wasn't saying. "Why did you say I needed to hear why?" Keanu asked. "Ah." The man hesitated. "Because he didn't just find me, he stopped me." "Stopped you?" The man swallowed hard. His hands shook again. Not from the cold this time. "That night, I was going to end things. I had it planned, clean, quiet. No one would notice. No one ever does." He stared at Atlas. "Then your dog shows up out of nowhere, just sits next to me, puts his head on my knee, stayed there, all night." Keanu felt his chest tighten. I tried to shoo him away, but he wouldn't go. He just looked at me, like he knew. Atlas pressed his body against Keanu's leg. The silence between them now felt sacred. "I don't know why he chose me," the man whispered, "but it felt like maybe I still mattered, just a little." Keanu nodded slowly. "You do." The man blinked, eyes red-rimmed. "That's why I called, not to give him back. To say thank you for letting him exist." They stood there in the soft gray morning light, a moment suspended in quiet gravity. Keanu looked at the man, this stranger who had, for reasons no one could explain, become a turning point in both his life and Atlas's. "What's your name?" Keanu asked. The man hesitated. "Roy." "Roy," Keanu repeated. "Do you have a place to stay?" Roy shrugged. "This bench has been my address longer than I care to admit. I'm fine. Don't worry about me." "I do," Keanu said, his voice steady. "I do worry." Roy looked away again, clearly uncomfortable with kindness. "I didn't do anything special. He came to me. I didn't earn this." Keanu looked down at Atlas, now sitting between them, leaning into Roy's leg like he still wasn't ready to say goodbye. "Sometimes we don't get what we've earned. Sometimes we get what we need." Roy swallowed. "He changed everything. That night, I was done. I'd written a note, left it on a bench in Echo Park. Then he showed up." Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. "There's a place, a vet I trust, not far from here. They can check him out, make sure he's okay. And I want you to go too." Roy looked startled. "Why me?" Keanu gave a small smile. "Because Atlas chose you, and I trust his judgment." Roy's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it quickly faded. "I don't have money, not for a vet, not for a ride." Keanu shook his head. "You don't need money, just say your name. They'll know. I've already called ahead." Roy took the card with shaking hands. "Why would you do this?" Keanu paused. "Because you did something no one else could. You were there. When Atlas needed someone, and maybe when you needed someone too." Roy stared at him, silent, before nodding slowly. "I'll go." Keanu reached into his pocket again and pulled out something else. A second card, this one handwritten. "And if you ever want to talk, or even just sit somewhere warm, here's my assistant's number. No pressure, just if you want to." Roy took it, hands trembling. "Thank you. I mean it." Keanu looked down at Atlas, still refusing to leave Roy's side. "You ready, buddy?" Atlas looked between them, then rose and stepped beside Keanu. But before they left, he turned and pressed his nose gently into Roy's chest. A final goodbye. Roy closed his eyes. As Keanu and Atlas walked away, the morning sun began to rise over East LA, casting golden light on the street ahead. But Keanu didn't rush back home. He took the long route, Atlas's leash loose in his hand, letting the quiet return between them, the kind that only comes after something sacred has passed through. Atlas throve, and somewhere behind them, Roy sat a little taller, a little warmer, with a card in his hand and a dog's silent gift echoing in his heart. The sun hung low as Keanu pulled his car to the side of a crumbling overpass in East Los Angeles. The engine ticked in the silence after he turned it off. A thin haze of smoke drifted from burning wood and makeshift barrels. Rows of tents, tarps, and trailers stitched together like patchwork lined the concrete embankment. He stepped out slowly, clutching a printed photo of Atlas in one hand, his heart pounding with cautious hope. As he walked, the distant sound of coughing echoed under the bridge, followed by children's laughter. Keanu kept his hood up. He didn't want to be recognized. Not here. Not now. He was just a man searching for something irreplaceable. A girl, couldn't have been older than 10, stood watching him from beside a rusted cart. Her clothes were oversized, her shoes mismatched, but her eyes were alert. Without a word, she pointed toward the far corner of the encampment, where an old trailer sat tucked between two large cement columns. Keanu nodded gratefully and moved in that direction. The air changed as he approached. It was quieter here. A dog's soft whine came from inside. Keanu stopped in front of the trailer door. His hand trembled as he raised it, unsure of what or who waited on the other side. "Come in," a gravelly voice called out. Keanu opened the door slowly. The scent of cedar chips and stale coffee met him first. The space was dim, lit only by a small solar lamp. And there, lying comfortably on a worn, quilted blanket, was Atlas. Keanu's breath hitched. Atlas didn't bark. Instead, his tail wagged slowly as he looked up at Keanu, head tilted, eyes calm and familiar. Keanu dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the dog, pressing his forehead against Atlas's fur. Relief flooded him. Tears stung his eyes. He didn't care who watched. Sense of urgency was hitting. "He's been waiting for you," the old man said. Keanu turned, now noticing him clearly. The man was in his 70s at least, with sun-weathered skin, a long gray beard, and eyes that once might have been blue. He wore a patched coat, sat on a milk crate, and held a chipped mug in his hands. "You're Clarence?" Keanu asked quietly. The man nodded. "I got your message, thank you." Clarence sipped from the mug, watching the reunion. "He showed up out of nowhere, just trotted in one night, curled up right beside me. Wouldn't eat till I spoke to him like I knew you." Keanu looked confused. "Spoke to him like you knew me?" Clarence chuckled, then coughed. "Well, I do, or I did, long time ago." Keanu's eyes narrowed slightly. "I don't understand." Clarence nodded slowly as if deciding how much to say. "You were just a kid, 10, maybe 11. You used to come with your mother to the soup kitchen on Maple Street, back when times were tight. Your mom helped serve the homeless. She always made sure I got extra soup and socks in the winter." Keanu's lips parted, stunned. That memory, Maple Street, the soup line, the smell of lentils and damp wool, came rushing back. Clarence's voice softened. "You were the quiet one. Sat with me once. Told me you liked stories. I gave you a copy of The Old Man and the Sea. Told you the world breaks everyone, but some become stronger at the broken places." Keanu stared at him. He remembered. Not everything, but enough. "You're that Clarence?" Clarence smiled, and for a brief second, the years seemed to fall away. Keanu looked down at Atlas again. "And now, you've saved him." Clarence shrugged. "Maybe he saved me too." Keanu sat on the floor beside Atlas, who rested his head on Keanu's knee, breathing slowly and peacefully. For the first time in 2 days, the tension in Keanu's shoulders eased, replaced by a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Clarence poured hot water from a kettle into a second mug and handed it to Keanu. "Not coffee, just tea," he said. "Chamomile. Good for settling things." Keanu took it with a quiet thank you. He glanced around the trailer. Carefully arranged books, a map of Los Angeles pinned to the wall, and drawings taped beside a small shelf. One was a pencil sketch of a boy reading under a tree. Another showed a large dog standing guard next to a campfire. "You've been here a while," Keanu said, his voice low. "Off and on," Clarence replied. "Some winters I head south, but my bones don't like to travel much anymore." Keanu hesitated, then asked, "Why didn't you call earlier, when Atlas first found you?" Clarence leaned back. "I didn't know whose dog he was at first. He didn't have a tag, just that gentle look in his eyes. But he stayed close, like he was watching out for me. Then, 2 nights ago, I heard someone in the encampment talking about a missing dog, a famous one. They showed me a flyer." He reached behind the crate and pulled out a folded paper. It was one of Keanu's handouts, the photo of Atlas, smudged but clear. "I knew then," Clarence continued, "and I figured maybe it was time." Keanu watched him carefully. "Time for what?" Clarence met his gaze. "Time to repay a debt." Keanu tilted his head. "Your mother," Clarence said quietly. "She didn't just give me soup and socks. She gave me dignity, back when I was invisible. And you, even as a boy, you looked people in the eye. You didn't flinch. You listened. That mattered. It mattered more than you'll ever know." Keanu felt a lump rise in his throat. Clarence smiled faintly. "So, when this dog came to me, your dog, I knew. It wasn't random. I don't believe in coincidences. He came for a reason." Keanu looked down at Atlas again, stroking his ears gently. He always knows where to go. There was a long pause. Outside, the wind rustled a tarp. Someone laughed in the distance, the kind of laugh that came from nothing and everything at once. Clarence took another sip of tea. "You know, I used to teach. Before the streets, literature, community college, Steinbeck, Baldwin, Shakespeare. I lost that life when my son died. I couldn't teach anymore, couldn't find my voice." Keanu's head turned toward him. Clarence's voice trembled now. "But Atlas, when he came in, he laid his head on my lap like he already knew the story, like he'd heard it before. And I found myself talking again, out loud, telling him things I hadn't said in years." Keanu's eyes softened. "I told him about my son, about the accident, about how I used to believe in things, about the book I never finished writing." Clarence leaned forward. "That dog didn't just show up. He reminded me who I used to be, who I still might be." Keanu listened in silence, his heart tightening with each word Clarence shared. There was something in the man's voice that struck a deep, buried chord, a mixture of pain and wisdom, of loss and the quiet persistence of hope. Clarence looked down at Atlas, then back at Keanu. "That's why I called, not just because he's yours, because I think he was meant to bring us both back to something." Keanu set the empty tea mug aside. "Clarence, I never forgot you. I didn't know your name back then, but I remember that day at the shelter. You were sitting on the curb with a book in your hands. It was The Old Man and the Sea." Clarence chuckled, surprised. "That's right. I read it cover to cover while waiting for the church van. You gave it to me," Keanu said softly. "Told me, some books are meant to find you, not the other way around." I read it 3 times that summer. Clarence blinked, visibly moved. "You were my first teacher," Keanu continued. "Not in a classroom, but in how you looked at me, like I matted. You have no idea what that meant. Clarence leaned back in his chair, eyes misting. And look what you became. I became someone because of people like you, Keanu said. Now, let me return the favor. Clarence stared at him, unsure what to say. I want you to come with me, just for a while, Keanu offered. Let's get you cleaned up, a hot meal, somewhere warm to sleep. No strings, just gratitude. Clarence hesitated, glancing around the trailer. I've got people here who count on me. The girl who brought you? That's Maria. Her mom works nights. She stays with me till morning. And the others? They come for stories. I read to them. Keanu nodded slowly. Then, let's find a better way. A place where you can still be that man, just with more light and less cold. Clarence finally whispered, I don't know if I can go back to that world. You don't have to go back, Keanu said gently. We'll build something new. There was silence again, but this time it was full of meaning. Outside, the morning sun had started to rise behind the buildings, casting a faint glow over the encampment. Atlas stirred, then walked over and rested his head on Clarence's lap one last time, as if to say thank you. Clarence gave him a final stroke behind the ears, then looked at Keanu. All right, he said softly, but only if Maria and the others come visit. Bonne chance, bien? Baby will, Keanu promised. And I'll bring more books. Clarence laughed, the sound warm and crackling like old wood. As they stepped outside, Maria stood waiting near the tent line, holding a stuffed rabbit missing one ear. She waved at Clarence, then looked up at Keanu. You're the man from the movies, she said shyly. Keanu smiled. Only when I'm lucky. She nodded and pointed to Atlas. He's magic, isn't he? Keanu looked down at his dog. Yeah, he whispered. He really is. Keanu sat on the edge of the makeshift cot, still processing the surreal sight before him. Atlas lay curled at Clarence's feet, tail wagging slowly, calm and trusting as if they had always known each other. The air inside the worn trailer smelled faintly of coffee and damp fabric. A small battery-powered lantern cast long shadows across the walls, and outside, the muffled hum of the freeway was the only sound breaking the quiet. Clarence, seated across from Keanu, leaned forward and studied him. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he held a chipped mug of tea. His voice was soft, almost like gravel rolled in a velvet bag. You don't remember me, do you? He asked, not bitter, just curious. Keanu blinked. I'm sorry, should I? Clarence chuckled, a raspy sound that ended in a cough. It's all right. You were just a kid back then, 19, maybe 20, cold winter in Toronto. You were doing that weird little Shakespeare thing at the back of the Junction Theater. The words struck something. Keanu's eyebrows lifted. Wait, Junction Theater? Clarence nodded slowly. That's the one. You were playing Mercutio. It was a mess of a production, barely any heat in that place. You used to sleep backstage sometimes, too broke to afford a real place, remember? A flash of memory returned, like light through fog. Small stage lights, peeling walls, and a crumbling green room where he had once curled up with a scarf over his face to keep warm. Someone had handed him gloves once. And soup. Hot, cheap, and perfect. It had felt like a lifeline. Keanu looked up slowly. You were the stagehand? The one who fixed the lights and brought that soup? Clarence smiled, eyes crinkling. Yeah, that was me. Everyone else just saw a grungy kid with a weird name trying too hard. But I saw you were serious, hungry, not just for food, but for meaning. Thought you deserved a little kindness. Keanu leaned back, stunned by how this moment was unfolding. In the chaos of his early years, names and faces had blurred, but emotions stayed sharp. He remembered the feeling of being seen for the first time, not as a wannabe actor, but as a person. That moment of quiet mercy, had carried more weight than Clarence could have ever known. "You were the first person in that town who made me feel like I wasn't invisible," Keanu said softly. "I didn't know your name. I don't think I even said thank you." Clarence shrugged. "Didn't need to. That dog of yours walked up to me 2 days ago, sat at my feet like he'd known me forever, almost like he was bringing something full circle." There was a long silence between them. Atlas let out a soft huff in his sleep, then rolled onto his back. Keanu looked at Clarence, truly looked. Under the grime and gray beard was a man with stories etched deep into his skin, a man who had once helped a struggling kid without asking for anything in return. And now, decades later, fate, or something more, had returned the favor in a way no one could have scripted. Keanu sat still for a long moment, as if anchoring himself in the weight of what had just been revealed. The trailer's silence wrapped around them like an old blanket. Clarence looked away, suddenly shy. He sipped from his mug again, though the tea inside had already cooled. "You know," Clarence said finally, "I used to think the smallest things didn't matter. Just doing your job, keeping to yourself. But then life falls apart, and you realize, maybe the small things were everything." Keanu nodded. "That cup of soup you gave me? I never forgot how it felt. I was cold, hungry, and wondering if I should just give up and go back home. That moment kept me going." Clarence rubbed his eyes. "I saw something in you back then. A kind of sadness, but also a light. I figured if someone gave you a little warmth, maybe you'd carry it forward." Keanu looked down at Atlas. The dog stirred, then settled again beside Clarence's foot, as if he belonged there. "You did more than give warmth. You helped me believe I could matter, even when nobody else did." Clarence smiled, but there was a trace of pain behind it. "That was a long time ago. Doesn't feel like it counts anymore." Keanu leaned forward. "It counts now more than ever." The older man looked away, his voice lower now. "I lost everything, Keanu. Wife died, job disappeared when the theater shut down, started drinking, then drifting. One bad year turned into 10. The streets don't let go easily." "I know," Keanu said gently. "I've seen what that kind of spiral can do." Clarence shrugged. "I figured if I just kept moving, maybe the world would forget I existed. Maybe that was safer." "But you didn't disappear," Keanu said. "You showed up. Again. Right when it mattered." Clarence raised an eyebrow. "You think this was fate or something?" "I don't know what I believe," Keanu said. "But Atlas doesn't just walk into a stranger's life for no reason. He's not that kind of dog. He found you. Just like you once found me." Clarence was quiet, then let out a soft laugh. "Maybe he's smarter than both of us." Keanu smiled. "He always has been." They sat like that for a while, surrounded by the hum of the highway and the distant chatter from the other tents outside. Clarence reached down and scratched behind Atlas's ear. The dog thumped his tail lazily in appreciation. "I don't have much," Clarence said. "But if this helped in some small way..." "It did," Keanu replied. "More than you know." Clarence nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "Then I guess I'm glad I stayed put. Long enough for the past to catch up, in a good way." Keanu's voice was steady now. "And maybe it's not done catching up yet." That night, Keanu didn't leave the encampment right away. Instead, he helped Clarence fix a broken latch on the trailer door. It wasn't much, but the small act seemed to restore something between them. Dignity, perhaps, or the fragile bridge of trust that had quietly formed. Clarence, still cradling Atlas's leash loosely in one hand, watched Keanu with a kind of disbelief, as if he still couldn't believe the man who had once been a shivering teenager backstage was now kneeling before him, tightening rusty screws. "You really came all this way," Clarence murmured. "All these years I figured you forgot." Keanu looked up. I never forget people who show kindness when they have nothing to gain. The moon had risen higher now, casting a pale glow over the gravel. A group of children ran by barefoot, laughing as they chased a deflated soccer ball. Clarence smiled faintly at the noise. I always wanted to teach, he said quietly. Not on a stage or anything. Just life stuff. Never got the chance. You did teach, Keanu said. You taught me survival has nothing to do with fame or talent. It's about being human when no one's watching. Clarence's throat moved, but no words came out. He gave a single, humble nod. After checking Atlas's legs and confirming the dog was healthy, Keanu stood and looked Clarence in the eyes. Come home with me, just for a few nights. Get warm, get some food, a real bed. Clarence waved it off at first. Nah, I'd be out of place. You weren't out of place when you saved me back then, Keanu said. You won't be now. There was a long pause. Clarence's eyes filled, and for a moment the decades between them collapsed. All right, he whispered, just for a bit. They walked slowly together toward Keanu's car, Atlas leading the way as if he'd never been missing. Keanu helped Clarence into the passenger seat and made sure the seat warmer was on. The whole ride back, Clarence barely spoke, but his hand rested gently on Atlas's back the entire time. When they reached Keanu's home, Atlas darted ahead and curled up in his favorite spot by the fireplace. Clarence stood in the doorway, stunned. I don't think I've been indoors in over a year. Keanu offered him a pair of slippers and a robe. You're welcome here, as long as you want. Clarence's voice cracked. You sure? I'm sure. Later that night, after Clarence had fallen asleep on the couch, Atlas snuggled at his feet. Keanu stood by the window, staring into the quiet hills. He thought about the way life loops in unexpected ways. How a stranger's kindness decades ago could come full circle in the most unexpected moment. He pulled out his journal and scribbled one line across the page. Some debts can't be repaid, but they can be honored. Clarence sat on an overturned milk crate just outside his battered trailer, the worn flannel jacket hanging off his thin shoulders. Atlas lay beside him like a guardian, eyes half-lidded but alert. The soft hum of freeway traffic buzzed overhead, a dull contrast to the quiet tension between the two men seated across from each other. Keanu didn't speak right away. He just watched Clarence, waiting. Finally, Clarence sighed and looked out toward the rows of tents and makeshift shelters stretching beyond the underpass. You ever lose your whole world in one day? He asked, voice raspy, like gravel being moved by the wind. I did. October 12, 2001. Keanu stayed still. He knew better than to interrupt. Clarence's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in memory. My son, Malcolm. He was in the Corps too, joined up after me. Strong kid, loved reading Hemingway. He used to quote The Old Man and the Sea like it was scripture. He paused, taking a shaky breath. One day he got deployed. I told him I was proud, but the truth was, I was terrified. I knew what war does, knew what it did to me. Keanu leaned forward slightly, listening with his full presence. His Humvee hit an IED. He was 22. They said he didn't suffer, but what did they know? Clarence's hand gripped the plastic armrest of his lawn chair. I never went to the funeral, couldn't. I drank instead. That's when things started slipping. Keanu's throat tightened. He had heard many stories of loss, but something in Clarence's voice, raw, stripped down to nothing but pain, cut deeper. I lost my job first. I was doing light rigging for local theater gigs back then. Couldn't concentrate. Made mistakes. Got hurt. No more jobs. Then I lost the apartment. Then friends stopped calling. I didn't blame them. Grief ain't easy to be around. Clarence turned to Keanu now, eyes gleaming with unshed tears. I never asked for help. Not from the VA, not from the church, not from anyone. I figured I deserved the silence. Figured maybe if I kept walking, I'd just vanish like smoke. Keanu swallowed hard. And then Atlas found you. Clarence chuckled, the sound rough and soft at once. That dog came out of nowhere, wandered into camp 2 nights ago, looked straight at me like he'd known me in another life, sat right down by my fire like it was the only place he wanted to be. He reached down, stroking Atlas's back. I thought he was a stray. Then I saw the tag. Kept meaning to call the number, but I don't know, I guess I just wanted to hold on to something good for a while longer. Keanu didn't judge. He couldn't. Everything Clarence said felt like a mirror of his own quiet fears. That pain, left unchecked, might someday isolate even the kindest heart. Keanu leaned back slightly, the weight of Clarence's story resting heavy in the air. The sun was starting to dip beyond the concrete walls of the underpass, casting long orange beams through the tattered fabric of nearby tents. But Keanu barely noticed the light. His mind was wrapped around the picture Clarence had painted, of grief so deep it hollowed out a man's life, inch by inch. Clarence shifted, adjusting his position as if his bones ached with every movement. Most people here, he said, motioning toward the encampment, got stories just like mine. Nobody starts out here. Nobody dreams of ending up on the pavement with a busted backpack and no family left. Atlas let out a low groan and pressed closer to Clarence's side. The old man smiled down at him, eyes soft. But your boy? He didn't treat me like I was broken. Didn't bark or back away, just stayed, like he knew. Keanu nodded slowly. He does that. Always finds the soul in a person before the world does. Clarence looked back at Keanu with something unreadable in his gaze. Part sorrow, part wonder. When I saw the name on his tag, I thought, no way, Keanu Reeves? But the more I looked at him, the more I knew this wasn't just any dog. He carried himself like someone raised by a good man. Keanu glanced down, brushing a hand over his jeans. He's been through his own share of pain. We found each other when I didn't think I could keep going. Clarence nodded like he already knew. The way he watched me, it was like he understood loss, like we were carrying the same weight. For a long moment, neither man said anything. A nearby tent flap rustled in the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a child laughed, and the sound felt out of place in such a broken setting. Keanu finally spoke, his voice low. I remember now. That winter in Toronto, the gloves, the soup, you said I'd need warmth more than applause. Clarence smiled faintly. You were just a kid back then, trying to make it in a cold city. I saw myself in you, figured if I could help you keep going one more night, it'd be enough. Keanu's eyes misted. You gave me something I never forgot, even if I couldn't place the face. When you're young and barely holding on, one act of kindness, it stays. Clarence shrugged modestly, but Keanu could see the way his chest rose, like the memory gave him a little bit of dignity back. I didn't do much. You did more than you think, Keanu said. There was another pause. The wind tugged at the tarp above them, making it flap like a sail caught in slow motion. Clarence looked down at Atlas, his hand resting on the dog's thick coat. I know he's yours, he said, and I'll hand him back without a fight. But I needed someone. I didn't know I did until he showed up. Keanu's throat tightened. You're not alone, Clarence. Not anymore. Clarence looked away, blinking hard. You know what the worst part is? He said. It's not the cold, not the hunger. It's being invisible. People walk by like you're not even there. Like your life stopped counting the day you lost your address. Keanu's voice was barely above a whisper. You were never invisible to him, or to me. Clarence gave a half smile, then leaned his head against the side of the trailer wall, his hand still resting gently on Atlas's back. When my son died, I couldn't even cry. It was like everything in me just shut off. I started walking, and I never really stopped. Didn't know where I was going, didn't care. And then, years later, this dog walks up like he'd been looking for me all along. Keanu crouched beside him, placing a steady hand on Clarence's shoulder. Maybe he was. Maybe we both were. For a while, neither of them moved. It wasn't silence, it was a kind of stillness that honored everything Clarence had just said. A pause thick with grief, recognition, and something else slowly growing between them. Understanding. Finally, Clarence let out a shaky breath. "You don't owe me anything, Keanu. I didn't call you for that. I just thought maybe it mattered that someone like him still remembered someone like me." Keanu looked him square in the eye. "You mattered long before this." As the evening settled deeper over the camp, Keanu stood, offering a hand. "Let's get you out of here." Clarence looked down at Atlas, then up at Keanu's outstretched arm, and for the first time in decades, he reached for hope. Keanu sat on the floor beside Atlas's bed, watching the old shepherd mix breathe softly. The house was still, wrapped in the silence that only arrived after a storm of worry. Atlas had returned, curled up on the rug like he never left. But Keanu couldn't sleep. Not after what he'd seen, not after meeting Clarence. The faces of the past swirled in his mind. Clarence's eyes, full of loss but somehow still kind. The rasp in his voice, the quiet dignity of a man the world had forgotten. Keanu kept hearing Clarence say, "That dog knew I needed someone." It echoed louder than any line he'd ever delivered on screen. He stood and walked to the bookshelf in his study. The top shelf was lined with old composition notebooks, journals he'd kept sporadically throughout his life. Some were filled with daily musings, others just fragments of memories or quotes that had stuck with him. He hadn't opened them in years. Tonight he reached for one labeled Toronto Winter, Winter 1984. He flipped slowly through yellowed pages, skimming entries from the early days of his acting career. Cold nights, long auditions, moments of hunger and doubt. And then he found it. A page half filled, written in smudged black ink. Been 15, freezing today. Couldn't feel my fingers. Almost didn't go on stage. Some guy in the wings, stagehand, gave me soup. Real soup, lentil I think, hot and good. Gave me gloves too. Said, "Keep going, kid. You've got something in your eyes." CM, stitched on his jacket. I won't forget that. Keanu read the passage again and again. Clarence Miller. It had to be him. The detail was so specific, the warmth of that day, the unexpected grace. It had etched itself into his memory even before he knew how much it would matter. He sat back, journal in hand, and stared at the floor. How many people like Clarence had faded from the spotlight of the world just because life was cruel and relentless? How close had he been in those early years to becoming someone else's forgotten memory? Keanu wasn't naive. He'd seen enough to know life rarely rewarded the quiet heroes, but something about Clarence's story felt unfinished. And it wasn't just guilt that kept Keanu awake. It was something deeper. A pull, a recognition, a truth he couldn't unsee. He glanced back at Atlas, who lifted his head and blinked at him, tail thumping weakly against the floor. Keanu reached out and scratched behind his ears. "You knew, didn't you?" he whispered. "You found him for a reason." A decision began to form in Keanu's mind. It was soft at first, like a whisper at the edge of a dream, but with each beat of silence it grew louder. He had to do something. Not out of obligation, but because it was right. Clarence wasn't just a man who'd helped him once. He was a mirror of what could have been. And he'd saved Atlas. That mattered. Keanu closed the journal and set it down beside him. He looked at the darkened window, where the moon cast a faint glow across the floor. Tomorrow would bring a new conversation, one he wasn't sure how to start. But for now, in the quiet presence of his old friend, he let the plan begin to take shape. Morning light broke gently through the curtains, but Keanu hadn't moved from his spot on the floor. Atlas was asleep again, his legs twitching with dream motion. Keanu stared ahead, still holding the final pages of the journal, his thoughts scattered between decades. He thought of the roles he had played: heroes, loners, warriors, but none of them compared to Clarence, a man who had given without expecting anything in return. That kind of goodness didn't need cameras or recognition. It just existed, quietly, beneath overpasses and behind theater curtains, forgotten by the world, but not by those it touched. Keanu stood and moved to the kitchen. He brewed a pot of coffee the old-fashioned way, just like he used to during the early theater years. The smell alone brought back 1,000 memories. He poured 2 mugs, even though only one would be used. It was habit. It was hope. As he sat at the counter, Keanu opened his phone and scrolled through messages. There were none from Clarence. The man had no phone, no address, just that worn trailer under the overpass. But Keanu had a name now, and a purpose. He called his assistant Evan and asked him to begin researching anything they could find about a Clarence Miller. Start with Toronto theater crew lists from the early 80s, Keanu said. I need to know where he's been and how we missed him all these years. Evan didn't ask why. He never did. He simply said, "On it," and hung up. Keanu sat back and ran his fingers through his hair. What would he even say to Clarence? Thanks for the soup? It sounded ridiculous, but maybe that's where it had to begin, with honesty. Not a grand gesture, just truth. He thought again about Atlas, how the dog had refused to leave Clarence's side, how he'd stayed in that camp without fear or hesitation. Animals had a way of seeing through noise, through status, through masks. And Atlas had chosen Clarence. That had to mean something. Maybe it wasn't just about repayment. Maybe it was about restoration. A man like Clarence deserved more than a handshake. He deserved dignity, safety, a warm bed, a second act. Keanu returned to the study and reopened the journal. He took a fresh page and began writing. Irons, you probably don't remember me from that theater in Toronto, but I remember you. You gave me warmth when I had none, and now I'd like to do the same. You mattered. You still do. Let's talk. He paused, then added, Atlas chose you. That's the highest honor in my world. He folded the page neatly, tucked it into an envelope, and wrote Clarence on the front in black ink. Then he glanced around the room. It was filled with awards, books, photos, but none of it meant more than what had happened the past 2 days. Clarence wasn't part of some script. He was real. And now he was part of Keanu's story in a way that couldn't be ignored. By noon, Keanu was back in his car, with the letter in hand, driving back toward the encampment. This time, he wasn't just reclaiming a dog. He was reclaiming a connection, a piece of his past, a thread that had been buried under time, but never truly lost. And as the city passed by, blurring into motion, Keanu whispered the same words he'd once heard backstage in a freezing theater. Keep going, kid. You've got something in your eyes. Only now, he wasn't the kid anymore. Keanu pulled up just after sunrise, a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches resting on the passenger seat beside him. The early morning light stretched long shadows over the tent-lined pavement beneath the overpass. The city was waking slowly, but the camp had already stirred to life. Figures moving, voices low, the smell of stale fire smoke clinging to the air. He stepped out, holding the bag in one hand and a blanket tucked under his arm. Atlas padded beside him, leash-free, as if sensing where they were going. A small girl with tangled hair and bare feet ran ahead of them, shouting, Clarence, he's back! Keanu nodded to a man arranging scavenged supplies nearby, then made his way to the trailer. The door creaked open, and Clarence appeared in the frame, still in his layered flannel shirt, eyes red from the cold or lack of sleep. Maybe both. Atlas immediately trotted over to him, nuzzling his knee. Clarence scratched behind the dog's ears, his expression softening. "I brought food," Keanu said gently. Clarence didn't move at first. Then he stepped down the trailer stairs, slowly, rubbing his hands together. "You didn't have to come back," he said. "I did," Keanu replied. "Not just for Atlas, for you." He offered the food and the blanket, but Clarence hesitated. Pride flickered across his worn face like a shadow. He looked around, as if checking to see who was watching, and then took the bag without a word. Keanu placed the blanket on a folding chair near the trailer. "I also brought a vet to check Atlas, if that's okay with you. He's just waiting down the street. Won't take long. Just to make sure he's okay." Clarence didn't respond immediately. He crouched beside Atlas, running a weathered hand down his back. "He's tougher than he looks," he said softly. "But sure. Long as he comes back." Keanu crouched too, his elbows on his knees. "He always comes back." There was silence between them, filled only by the faint hum of traffic overhead. Clarence pulled out a thermos and poured himself some weak coffee, then offered Keanu a cup. Keanu declined, but smiled. That tiny gesture, offering something when you have almost nothing, meant more than words. "I was like you once," Clarence said. "Too proud to take help, even when I needed it. You know that feeling?" Keanu nodded. "I do." Clarence chuckled, but it was hollow. "Bet you never needed much." Keanu didn't let that hang. He sat fully on the edge of the folding chair and leaned forward. "When I first moved to LA, I lived out of my car for a while," he said. "I was 20. Didn't want to tell anyone. I was scared, embarrassed, and broke. Then this old man who worked night security at a theater lot started leaving peanut butter sandwiches on my windshield." Clarence raised an eyebrow. "I never saw his face, but he saved me. And I always told myself if I ever saw someone slipping, I'd try to be that person too." Clarence stared at him for a long time. Then he looked down at Atlas, who rested his chin on Clarence's foot. "You sure know how to mess with a man's pride," Clarence muttered. Keanu stood slowly, offering his hand. "Just come with me, we'll talk. No pressure, no obligations. Just two men and a coffee." Clarence took a long breath and reached for his coat. They walked together to Keanu's car, Clarence moving slower than usual, but with a new steadiness in his steps. Keanu helped him into the front seat without a word. Atlas jumped into the back like it was routine. The vet was waiting in a discreet mobile van 2 blocks away. Keanu had arranged it to keep things private, knowing Clarence wouldn't want attention. The vet, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Emery, gave Atlas a quick checkup in the warmth of the van while Clarence stood beside her, asking more questions than Keanu expected. "He's good," she said kindly. "Hydrated, just a bit lean. But he's strong." Clarence nodded, looking relieved. Back in the car, Keanu drove them to a nearby cafe tucked into the corner of an older neighborhood. It wasn't flashy, just a cozy diner with scratched booths and the smell of cinnamon and brewed coffee in the air. Clarence looked around like he hadn't stepped inside a place like this in years. Maybe he hadn't. They slid into a booth. The waitress brought them fresh coffee without asking. Clarence stared into his cup like it held answers. Keanu spoke first. "What happened, Clarence?" "After Toronto." Clarence chuckled under his breath. "Life happened. My son, Darren, he was the anchor. Then he enlisted, came back different. Real quiet. Never said much, but I could see it. Something in his eyes." Clarence paused, blinking fast. "Took his life 2 years after coming home. That wasn't enough to pull him back." Keanu said nothing, only listened. Clarence went on. "After that, I just unraveled. Quit my job, started drinking, lost the apartment, and one day I just didn't go back. Didn't see the point. Been drifting ever since. One day here, one day there. He looked down. Until Atlas found me. That dog sat by me like he knew, like he was waiting. I didn't even feed him the first day. Just talked, and he stayed. Keanu reached for his coffee. His fingers tightened around the cup. "You saved me once," he said. "You may not remember, but you gave me a pair of gloves backstage. I had frostbite on my fingers, could barely tie my boots. You handed me that soup like it was nothing, but it meant everything." Clarence's eyes met his, wet and confused. "That was you?" he whispered. Keanu nodded. "That's why I came back. Not just because of Atlas. Because you matter, and you always did." Clarence looked away quickly, wiping his face. "I didn't think anyone remembered." "I did," Keanu said. "And now I want to help. But only if you'll let me." Clarence looked like he was about to protest again. Then he exhaled and looked down at his hands. "I don't know where to start." "We'll start with a shower, a haircut, and a warm bed tonight," Keanu said. "Then we'll figure the rest out." Clarence gave a small, broken laugh. "A warm bed sounds like a miracle." Keanu smiled. "It's not a miracle. It's just long overdue." They paid the check, stepped back into the sunlight, and stood beside the car. Clarence looked down at Atlas, who wagged his tail and brushed his head against his leg. Then he looked at Keanu. "I'm still scared." Keanu put a hand on his shoulder. "That was I." And for the first time in years, Clarence nodded, not to be polite, but because something inside him finally said yes. The sun filtered gently through the trees as Keanu stood on the back porch of his guest house, a cup of tea warming his hands. Just beyond the glass, Clarence sat in a cushioned chair, gazing out at the quiet garden. Atlas lay curled at his feet, his breathing steady, head gently resting on Clarence's worn boots. Keanu watched them in silence. Something about the scene felt timeless. Clarence hadn't said much that morning, but his posture was different. There was a softness in his shoulders, a stillness that hadn't been there before. News of the reunion hadn't gone public, at least not in any official sense. But Keanu's assistant, Elena, had quietly begun documenting the journey. With Clarence's permission, she took a few photos. Atlas curled beside the trailer, Clarence's hand on Keanu's shoulder, the faded collar tag with Keanu's name still barely visible under the scratches. She shared them with a small nonprofit that focused on helping homeless veterans. To their surprise, the images ignited something, not outrage or pity, but recognition. Within a week, the nonprofit's inbox filled with stories from people who had once been helped by a stranger, and from others who had once offered kindness, thinking it had gone unnoticed. Keanu didn't want to commercialize the moment. He didn't want to use Clarence's pain to inspire headlines. But Clarence, quiet and deliberate, gave a nod one evening while stirring sugar into his coffee. "If it helps someone else find their way back," Clarence murmured, "then let him see it." So Keanu leaned in. He wrote a short note, handwritten, raw, and scanned it for the post. "This is Clarence, this is Atlas, and this is a reminder that healing doesn't always wear a cape. Sometimes it walks on 4 legs and waits quietly until you're ready." The post went viral. Comments poured in from around the world. People spoke about dogs who had saved their lives, strangers who had sat beside them in their darkest hours, and acts of grace that had gone unthanked. Clarence never checked the comments, but Keanu read them aloud sometimes in the early evenings. "Bo says you remind her of her grandfather. He used to walk 5 miles every Sunday to feed stray cats." Clarence chuckled, brushing his hand down Atlas's back. Smart man. At night, Atlas always found his way to Clarence's side. Though Keanu's home had guest rooms, the old man preferred the small guest house tucked behind the garden. There, with no marble countertops or sleek finishes, he found something closer to peace. Atlas seemed to sense it too. He never barked, never whined. He simply stayed. One evening, Keanu returned from a charity dinner to find Clarence asleep in a recliner, an old plaid blanket draped over his knees. Atlas was awake, head up, eyes locked on the door. When Keanu stepped inside, Atlas didn't move. He just watched, and then, slowly, wagged his tail once. Keanu knelt beside him, stroking his fur. "You picked the right man," he whispered. "Again." Atlas closed his eyes. Clarence stirred, but didn't wake. For a moment, the silence wasn't heavy. It was comforting, like a story nearing the end of a chapter, not with a bang, but with peace. The following morning, Keanu walked into the kitchen with 2 steaming mugs, one black coffee, no sugar, one Earl Grey with a hint of honey. He knew Clarence's preference now, small details that had quietly formed the rhythm of their days. Clarence sat outside on the porch again, wrapped in a sweater Elena had found tucked away in a storage bin. He looked older than usual that morning, more tired than weak, as if the years had decided to show themselves all at once. But when he saw Keanu approaching, his face lifted into a grin that still carried mischief. "You trying to civilize me now, Reeves?" Keanu handed him the coffee. "Just trying to say thanks." Clarence nodded slowly, his gaze drifting toward the fence line where Atlas stood alert, watching a squirrel dart along the trees. "He watches everything," Clarence said. "Like he's making sure I'm still here." "You are," Keanu replied quietly, "and that matters." Later that day, Elena showed them a draft of the short documentary she was assembling. It wasn't flashy or dramatized, just a soft, honest narrative about Atlas, about Clarence, and about how paths can cross again when you least expect it. There was a moment in the film where Clarence spoke off camera, voice trembling slightly. "I didn't think I mattered anymore, but that dog didn't believe that, and neither did Keanu." That line echoed in Keanu's head for hours. By the end of the week, local papers picked up the story. Nothing exploitative, no headlines screaming for attention, just small pieces titled "A Second Chance" or "Actor's Dog Sparks Unlikely Reunion." A few shelters even reported an increase in adoption inquiries, especially from veterans and older individuals. One of them, a Vietnam vet named Raymond, left a voicemail on Elena's line. "I saw your piece. I ain't touched a dog in 20 years. Thought I couldn't take care of anyone again. But then I saw that man, the way that mutt looked at him, made me think, maybe I've still got something left to give." Clarence listened to the message in silence. Then he leaned back and wiped the corner of his eye. "Never thought I'd be an influencer." Keanu laughed. "Guess you're going viral whether you like it or not." But beneath the humor, they both knew something real was unfolding. Clarence had found safety, not just physical, but emotional. Keanu, in turn, found a reminder of the man he used to be. Hungry, uncertain, walking into an old backstage hallway in Toronto where someone had handed him gloves and soup and asked for nothing in return. That act had never left him, and now, full circle, he had the chance to return it. That night, as Clarence settled into bed and Atlas curled by his side, Keanu stepped outside and looked up at the stars. For the first time in days, he felt a calm settle in his chest. Atlas was home, Clarence had a roof, and something bigger, something unspoken, was healing. Not everything broken had to stay that way. Later that week, while Clarence rested in the quiet warmth of the guest house, Keanu found himself drawn to the worn canvas duffel bag that sat tucked beside an old armchair. Clarence had given no sign there was anything important inside, but something about the way he always made sure it was zipped up and close by suggested otherwise. Keanu asked quietly, "Mind if I look?" Clarence, sipping tea at the window, gave a slight nod. Keanu opened the bag and froze. Inside were folders, old and weather-worn, filled with yellowing sketch paper and fragile notebooks. The first drawing Keanu pulled out stopped his breath. an intricately detailed stage set, fully rendered in pencil and ink. It depicted a moonlit alley, the shadow of a lone figure stretching across cobblestone. Every brick, every beam of light had been placed with care and precision. It wasn't just good, it was visionary. Keanu flipped through more pages. Forests, castles, prisons, dreamscapes. Each one had character, depth, emotion. These weren't idle doodles from a man with too much time on his hands. They were the work of someone who once dreamed with purpose. Among the sketches were design plans, full lighting notes, and handwritten stage directions in careful script. The initials at the bottom corner of every page read CM. Clarence, did you make all these? The old man looked over slowly. His eyes softened, then dropped. Long time ago, he said quietly. Before the war, before everything. Keanu sat down across from him and gently laid the drawings on the table between them. These are extraordinary. Why didn't you ever say anything? Clarence shrugged. Didn't seem like it mattered anymore. Who would care about what some washed-up stagehand used to draw? Keanu leaned in. I care, and I know others would too. Clarence, these are masterworks. For a long moment, Clarence said nothing. He simply stared at the papers, as if seeing them for the first time in years. Finally, he whispered, They were dreams, things I wanted to build someday. But life, it gets away from you. Keanu thought about the night they met in that theater decades ago. He remembered the soup, the gloves, the warmth from a stranger when everything felt cold. And now, sitting across from him, he saw it. Clarence hadn't just been a kind face. He had been an artist in hiding, a voice never heard. The next day, Keanu carefully selected several of Clarence's best sketches and scanned them. Without telling Clarence, he emailed them to his friend Sasha Bellamy, a renowned theater director in New York known for innovative productions and bold set design. She replied within hours. Who did these? Her message read. These are incredible. There's soul in every line. I want to speak to him. Keanu shared the message with Clarence that evening. The old man's hands trembled slightly as he read the words aloud. I can't believe it, he murmured. I thought this part of me was long gone. You were always more than what the world saw, Keanu said gently. That part of you never disappeared. It just waited. Clarence shook his head, blinking back emotion. I didn't think anyone remembered me like that. Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. I didn't forget. A few days later, Sasha Bellamy arranged a video call with Clarence. Keanu set it up in the guest house, propping the laptop on the kitchen table, while Clarence nervously straightened his shirt. Atlas lay curled at Clarence's feet, calm as ever, as if he knew something important was happening. When Sasha's face appeared on the screen, Clarence froze. She smiled warmly. Clarence Miller, I presume? Clarence gave a sheepish nod. In the flesh. Well, what's left of it? Sasha chuckled. Keanu wasn't exaggerating. These sketches are phenomenal. I've been in this business for 25 years, and I can count on one hand how many times I've seen that level of emotional design on paper. Clarence cleared his throat. I used to study set design back in the 70s. Got a scholarship. Thought maybe I'd end up working Broadway one day. But I needed money fast, so I dropped out and took a stagehand job. Figured I'd get back to it later. Then came the Marines. Then my son. Then nothing. Sasha's expression softened. I'd love to feature some of your work in an upcoming project. It's a production about unsung heroes, and your art. It tells stories people forget how to tell. Clarence blinked rapidly, looking down at his weathered hands. You'd really want my designs? I want your heart, Sasha said. And it's all over those pages. After the call ended, Clarence sat in silence for a long while. Then he whispered, I thought that part of me was dead. Keanu answered softly, maybe it just needed someone to believe in it again. That night, Clarence opened a small wooden box he kept tucked away in his duffel bag. Inside were old photographs, black and white shots of him as a young man building sets, smiling with sawdust on his jeans. There was a photo of his son James, maybe 8 years old, holding a toy hammer on one of Clarence's unfinished designs. He handed the photo to Keanu. This was my boy. He used to say I made magic happen, with wood and light. After I lost him, I stopped building anything. Thought I didn't deserve to. Keanu held the photo carefully. You don't have to prove anything, Clarence, but if you still want to create, the world is listening now. For the next few weeks, Clarence spent afternoons drawing again. Keanu brought him new sketchbooks, high-quality pencils, and digital tools. Clarence was reluctant at first, but once he started, it was as if a dam had broken. His hand moved across the paper with practiced grace. He designed stages that looked like memories, scenes from childhood, places he imagined heaven might look like. Some were simple, others were so elaborate that Keanu wondered how they could even be built. One morning, Clarence showed Keanu a new sketch. It was a modest stage set, a small bench under a tree, with a dog curled up at the actor's feet. This one's for Atlas, he said. He brought me back. Keanu framed the drawing and hung it in his own home office. Word of Clarence's talent continued to spread quietly, and soon a theater in Pasadena offered him a consulting role. Not a charity favor, but a real offer, paid and dignified. Clarence hesitated. I'm not the man I used to be. No, Keanu said, smiling. You're better. Clarence sat on the edge of the porch outside the guest house, a blanket draped over his shoulders, his hands trembling slightly as he cupped a warm mug of tea. The sky was clear, but the night air held a quiet chill. Keanu stood a few feet away, watching Atlas snooze peacefully near the garden's edge. The house lights glowed behind them, casting soft golden halos through the bushes. It should have been a moment of comfort, but something hung in the air, unresolved. I need to tell you something, Clarence said after a long silence. Keanu turned toward him, sensing the weight in his voice. I didn't recognize you at first, Clarence continued, his voice gravelly but steady. Not really. That night, when Atlas came to me, I thought it was just luck, a good dog finding a broken man. But when I heard you calling his name, when I realized he was yours, I couldn't sleep. Keanu moved closer, pulling a folding chair beside Clarence, saying nothing, just listening. Clarence stared into the distance, eyes glistening. My son's name was Atlas too. Keanu blinked, stunned. Your son? Clarence nodded slowly, gripping the mug like it anchored him to something real. He died in 1998. Car accident. I was supposed to pick him up that day, but I was late. Just 10 minutes. I never forgave myself, and for a long time I thought, maybe he didn't either. The confession lingered, in the quiet, stretching between the two men like an invisible thread. Keanu glanced over at his dog, who now lay sprawled in the grass, chest rising and falling in rhythm. His Atlas. Clarence continued, the words rough and unpracticed. The night your Atlas came to me, he didn't bark, didn't growl. He just sat next to me like he'd been sent, like something, or someone, knew I couldn't take one more night alone. He paused, looking up. When I saw his name on that collar, I couldn't breathe. I thought maybe I was hallucinating, or maybe it was a message. Keanu's voice was soft. What kind of message? Clarence set the mug down. His hands were clenched now, resting on his knees. That maybe my boy forgave me. That maybe I could forgive myself. That maybe not everything was lost. His throat caught, and for the first time in years, his weathered eyes spilled over. Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. They sat like that for a long moment. Two men from opposite worlds, now bound by the strange, sacred thread of memory and pain. No more words were needed right away. The quiet was its own form of language, a whispered apology carried by a name, by a dog, by time itself. Keanu stayed beside Clarence, the warmth of their shared silence heavier than any conversation. The air had stilled, and even the sounds of the city seemed to pause around them. In the faint glow from the porch light, Clarence looked down at his weathered hands, as if they still carried the weight of a child he never got to carry again. "I was a different man back then," he said quietly. "Angrier, stubborn. I thought being strong meant never asking for help. I buried my grief under routines, whiskey, and noise, until everything slipped through my fingers." Keanu nodded, eyes reflecting the dim porch light. "Grief has a way of teaching you the truth. It's just a brutal teacher." Clarence gave a dry chuckle, then wiped his eyes. That boy was bright, had this way of seeing beauty in broken things. He'd sketch birds with torn wings, trees that grew sideways through concrete. He always said things could heal, even when they didn't look like they could. He paused, then added, "I never believed him until that dog showed up." Keanu glanced toward Atlas again, lying quietly as if listening from a distance. "I've done a lot in this life I'm not proud of," Clarence said. "But that night, when Atlas curled up beside me, I felt like maybe the ledger wasn't closed yet." Keanu's voice was soft, almost reverent. "It's not." Clarence turned to him, surprised by the certainty in his tone. "You helped me once when I didn't even have the courage to ask," Keanu said. A stagehand offering soup and gloves to a broke kid backstage? That mattered. More than you probably ever knew. You didn't just keep me warm, you reminded me I wasn't invisible. Clarence tried to speak, but his throat caught again. "I think the universe remembers things we forget," Keanu continued. "Kindness doesn't vanish, it just waits." They sat again in silence, not awkward but full, the kind of silence that heals. Eventually Clarence stood, his legs unsteady. "I'm tired." "I'll help you inside," Keanu offered, rising. Clarence shook his head gently. "No, just one more minute." He stepped off the porch and walked over to where Atlas lay. The dog raised his head, ears alert, tail thumping lightly on the ground. Clarence knelt slowly, his joints protesting. He placed a hand on the dog's thick fur and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "for coming to find me, for carrying a name I thought I'd never say again without breaking." Atlas didn't move, only pressed his head gently against Clarence's chest. Keanu watched from the porch, heart full and aching all at once. Clarence looked up one last time before heading inside. Some debts get paid in unexpected ways. I thought I was the one keeping Atlas safe, but maybe he was the one saving me. Keanu stayed outside after Clarence went in, staring into the stars overhead. The sky didn't speak. It didn't need to. He finally whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Some things don't need answers, just presence. Just grace." Behind him, the soft sound of Atlas's paws padded up the steps. The dog lay beside Keanu, head resting on his shoe, and in that quiet moment, Keanu knew this story was far from over. The lobby was warm and glowing with the soft amber lights of the historic Crestmont Theater. Guests in suits and gowns whispered with anticipation. The air buzzed with quiet reverence, the kind reserved for the forgotten geniuses who once shaped magic behind the curtains. Clarence stood just outside the entrance, his hand trembling slightly on the polished cane Keanu had gifted him. He wore a charcoal gray suit tailored just days before, complete with a deep navy tie and a crisp white pocket square. His beard had been trimmed to a neat stubble, and his eyes, though ringed by age, shone with something newly awakened. Beside him, Atlas sat alert, his black and brown coat gleaming under the marquee lights. The dog's presence brought Clarence comfort in a way nothing else could. People passing by glanced down and smiled at the animal, unaware of the bond that had changed everything. Keanu approached from the side door and gently placed a hand on Clarence's back. "Ready?" he asked. Clarence exhaled and gave a slight nod. His fingers twitched with nerves, but he took the step forward. The doors opened. Inside, the event had already begun. A live jazz trio played softly on stage, and the host, a Broadway producer named Lyle Brennan, stood at the microphone. When he spotted Keanu and Clarence entering, he paused. Then he smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," Lyle said, his voice echoing through the velvet-draped auditorium. "Before we continue, we have someone here tonight who embodies everything this theater stands for. He's not an actor or a playwright. He's something rarer. He's the kind of man who made the stage feel like home for everyone who walked on it." All heads turned toward Clarence. At first, confusion, then curiosity, and finally, rising warmth. "This man," Lyle continued, "once built sets so real they made belief feel effortless. He worked quietly in the shadows, but tonight, we shine the spotlight where it belongs. Clarence Miller, would you join us?" A silence settled over the room. Then came a rising wave of applause, then cheers, then people standing one by one. Clarence froze. He looked at Keanu. "They're clapping for you," Keanu whispered. Clarence took a breath, then walked slowly but surely down the aisle with Atlas beside him. He moved like a man remembering who he used to be. He reached the edge of the stage and hesitated. Keanu took his arm and guided him up the steps. Clarence stood in the light, blinking into the crowd, humbled and overwhelmed. The ovation didn't fade, it grew. Tears welled in Clarence's eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. He let them stay. He let the world see. Clarence approached the microphone, his hands trembling slightly, but his spine straight. He glanced at the audience, faces young and old, some familiar from years past, others brand new. For a moment, he couldn't speak. Atlas sat quietly at the edge of the stage, gazing up at him, tail gently thumping against the floor. "I'm not used to being looked at," Clarence finally said, his voice low but steady. A few soft chuckles echoed in response. "I spend most of my life behind the curtains, building things. Not dreams exactly, just pieces of wood and light, arranged in a way that let other people believe in something." He paused. The silence in the room was full of breathless attention. "Few and I didn't think anyone remembered," he continued, his voice breaking slightly. "To be honest, I didn't think it mattered. I just liked the work. I liked helping people feel something." Clarence reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, creased photo. It showed him as a young man standing beside a painted backdrop of stars. "This was my favorite piece. We did a show once about a boy who believed the moon could talk. The whole crew thought it was silly, but that boy believed so hard, so fiercely, it made the whole audience believe too. That's when I knew I wasn't building fake worlds. I was building hope." A few people in the audience wiped away tears. "And there was one actor in that show," Clarence said, glancing at Keanu in the front row. "He was young, quiet, didn't say much, but he stayed after the performance to help clean up. He asked about the stars, said they looked real. I gave him my last thermos of soup that night. Didn't think much of it then." Clarence's voice faltered. "But somehow, 30 years later, that same kid walked back into my life with a dog named Atlas. I guess some stars really do come back around." The audience stood again, this time not just clapping, but cheering, a warm, thunderous embrace of a man who had once vanished into the margins. Keanu stood too, his eyes glassy, hands clasped together with quiet pride. He didn't speak. He just let Clarence have the moment, every second of it. After the applause softened, the host stepped forward and offered Clarence a handcrafted award, an engraved plaque that read, "For lighting the path for others, Clarence Miller, master of silent wonders." Clarence accepted it with trembling hands. Atlas nudged his knee gently, as if reminding him he wasn't alone. He knelt down, one hand resting on the dog's back. "I don't know what I did to deserve any of this," he whispered, though the mic still caught his words. "But maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's not about what you deserve. Maybe it's about what you give, even when nobody sees it." That night, as the gala ended and the lights dimmed, Clarence walked out of the theater, not as a man forgotten, but as someone reclaimed, someone remembered. Keanu offered his arm, and Clarence took it. Outside, under the quiet starlight, Clarence looked up and smiled. "You know," he said, "those stars up there still look fake to me." Keanu grinned. "Not tonight, Clarence, not tonight." And with Atlas leading the way, they disappeared into the Los Angeles evening. Three souls quietly reminding the world that sometimes even the smallest backstage acts echo the loudest. Weeks had passed since the night of the gala. Clarence had become a quiet but meaningful presence around Keanu's property. He never asked for anything, rarely spoke unless spoken to, but every evening he sat on the porch beside Atlas, watching the sunset. Sometimes Keanu joined him. Other times, the silence between them said enough. Then, one morning, Keanu awoke to find the guest house empty. The bed was made neatly, the small fridge had been cleaned out. A borrowed coat hung from the back of the door. Atlas whined and pawed at the front door, sensing something was off. Keanu walked in slowly, scanning the space. On the small wooden desk sat a folded letter, sealed with a strip of old masking tape. The handwriting on the front was shaky but clear. For Keanu. He sat down, his heart tightening as he opened the note. It was short, written in pen on the back of an old stage cue sheet from decades ago. "Dear Keanu, thank you for seeing me. Not the shell I've become, but the man I once was, and maybe still am. You reminded me that grace doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in a warm cup of coffee, a clean pair of socks, a dog who doesn't leave your side. You gave me all three. I've chosen to go quietly, not because I'm ungrateful, but because I know when a curtain must fall. I was never meant to take more than I gave. Tell Atlas I said goodbye, and thank you for everything. CM, the man who handed you soup in 1984. Keanu pressed the letter to his chest. He didn't cry right away. He just sat there, still as stone, letting the memory of Clarence's raspy laugh echo in the back of his mind. By the time he walked outside, the early morning mist had already lifted. There were no signs of Clarence. No footprints in the gravel, just an empty bench and the faint smell of pipe tobacco in the air. Keanu didn't call the police. He didn't check the cameras. He didn't go after him. Some goodbyes weren't meant to be interrupted. Instead, he walked Atlas to the garden behind the house, the one where Clarence had spent afternoons trimming the overgrown hedges just because it gave him peace. In the center of the garden, under a jacaranda tree in full bloom, Keanu placed a small stone. On it, he etched the initials C.M. No dates, no titles, just the quiet legacy of a man who had mattered, even if the world had forgotten him. The following week, Keanu received a small envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a sketch, one Clarence must have done in private. It showed a stage lit from above, with one actor in the spotlight and a stagehand standing just outside the beam of light, watching. On the back, Clarence had written just 6 words. "The light is yours. I'm home." The days that followed felt quieter, heavier. Keanu found himself looking over his shoulder, half expecting Clarence to be there again, muttering about the weather or offering to fix something that wasn't broken, But the guest house remained empty, the garden untouched, except for the soft blooming of the jacaranda petals that fell over the stone. Atlas didn't understand at first. He would trot toward the porch each morning, tail wagging hopefully, then stop and stare. Sometimes he whined. Sometimes he simply lay down in the shade and waited. Animals feel absence more honestly than humans. They don't ask why, they just feel it. One evening, Keanu returned from a charity event and found Atlas curled up on Clarence's old flannel blanket, the one he used to keep folded at the foot of the bed. It hadn't moved since Clarence left. Keanu knelt down beside him, placing a gentle hand on the dog's back. "You miss him too, huh?" he whispered. The air was still, the kind of quiet that feels sacred. The next morning, Keanu sat with his assistant and quietly told her everything. The dog, the stagehand, the soup in 1984, the broken Marine who reminded him that lives aren't measured in fame or fortune, but in the kindness we offer when no one's looking. "I don't think he wanted the world to remember him," Keanu said, "but I will." With her help, he began organizing something simple, private and beautiful. A small donation fund under Clarence's full name, not for attention but for dignity. It would support homeless veterans with artistic backgrounds, giving them tools and mentorship to rediscover their crafts. A quiet legacy, just like Clarence would have wanted. Later that week, Keanu stood in the garden again, the breeze stirring the jacaranda petals as he whispered a few words under his breath. Not a eulogy, not a prayer, just the words he never got to say in person. "You didn't take anything, Clarence. You gave me more than I knew I needed. You reminded me who I am." Then, as if on cue, Atlas trotted up with something in his mouth. It was an old dog tag, Clarence's, worn down and faded but still legible. Keanu took it gently and slid it into his jacket pocket. It felt like a signature on a story that was never meant to end with applause. He never spoke of Clarence in interviews, never posted about him. But in every small, quiet moment, a coat handed to a stranger, a warm drink left on a step, a kind nod to someone ignored, he honored him. Because sometimes, the people who vanish quietly leave behind the loudest echoes. And Clarence Miller, the man who once handed soup to a starving actor in a freezing theater hallway, had become one of those echoes. Not a footnote, a foundation. Keanu didn't need to chase him to say goodbye. He just needed to remember. And that he did, every single day. The lights inside the Beverly Hills ballroom were golden and soft, washing everything in a quiet glow. Dozens of polished tables circled the stage, each one filled with celebrities, philanthropists, and news anchors in formal wear. But in the green room, behind the curtain, Keanu Reeves sat alone, fingers resting lightly on the old dog collar he'd brought in his pocket. His tuxedo was crisp, but his mind wasn't on appearances. His thoughts were on a tent under an overpass, a man with tired eyes and hands that once built stories out of wood and wire, and a dog who had bridged two broken souls without ever saying a word. Months had passed since Clarence walked away into the stillness of his own choosing, leaving only that short note behind. Keanu had read it 100 times. "Thank you for seeing me," it read. Not saving, not fixing, seeing. Tonight wasn't about celebration for Keanu. It was about memory, about witness. The award sitting in its velvet box behind him felt like a distant object, separate from the journey that brought him here. And that journey hadn't started on a movie set. It had started the night Atlas didn't come home. The MC's voice echoed through the curtains. "And now, to present the Humanitarian Recognition Award, please welcome..." Keanu stood, heart steady, breath slow. His assistant met him near the curtain, giving a simple nod. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. They both knew this moment wasn't about fame or career. It was about something deeper, something real. As he stepped into the wings, the sound of polite applause filled the air, but in Keanu's ears, it was drowned by quieter things. The hum of a heater inside a cold trailer. The soft scratching of a pencil on paper as Clarence drew sets that never saw a stage. The click of Atlas's nails against concrete as he followed a stranger through the night. A staff member gestured to him. It was time. He stepped toward the podium, slowly, holding that collar in his hand. The applause grew louder, phones came out, cameras flashed, but none of that reached him. Not really. He looked out across the room. So many polished faces, so many eyes expecting a speech. And in the front row, next to a producer Keanu had worked with years ago, sat a single reserved seat. Empty. On it was a folded program and a small white card. In honor of CM. Keanu took a long breath, stepped up to the microphone, and paused. Not to collect his thoughts, but to let the moment settle. Keanu adjusted the microphone gently, still holding the worn collar in one hand. For a few seconds, he didn't speak. The silence stretched, not awkward, but reverent. Finally, his voice came, low and steady. "I've stood on a lot of stages in my life," he began. "Some of them were built with lights and sets. Others were moments like this. Unexpected, humbling, honest." He held up the dog collar just slightly, then looked at it. This belonged to Atlas. He's a dog, but if you've ever been loved by one, you know they're more than that. They feel what you don't say. They stand guard over the parts of you that haven't healed. He paused, eyes drifting to the front row again, where that small white card sat on the empty chair. "Months ago, Atlas went missing. I thought I'd lost him for good. What I didn't realize was that I was about to find something else entirely, a person I'd forgotten, but who never forgot me." A hush fell over the room. People leaned in, drawn not to a celebrity speech, but to something deeper. "Clarence Miller," Keanu continued, "was a stagehand on one of my earliest plays when I was 19. I didn't even know his last name until this year. Back then, I was broke, cold, wandering. He gave me soup and gloves and didn't ask for anything in return, just said, 'You'll be okay, kid.'" He smiled faintly at the memory, then let it fade into something heavier. Years later, that same man was living in a trailer under an overpass, forgotten by most, fighting grief he never talked about. And somehow, my dog found him, stayed with him, wouldn't leave. A ripple of emotion passed through the audience, some dabbing their eyes, others simply watching, stilled. I went to find my dog, but what I found was a friend I never thanked, a man who once helped me survive, and all he wanted was to be seen, to be remembered for the work he once did, for the dreams he once had. Keanu's voice cracked slightly, but he didn't shy away from it. "This award isn't about me. It's not about Hollywood or headlines. It's about people like Clarence, people who give quietly, who carry loss and pain, but still show up for someone else. People who fade into the background, because the world doesn't know how to honor what can't be monetized." He stepped back from the mic for a beat, then leaned in again. "There are thousands of Clarences out there, veterans, artists, parents, people who loved deeply, lost greatly, and still held on. This," he said, holding the award now in both hands, "is for them." He looked once more at the empty seat in the front row. "And if you ever find yourself wondering if your life meant something, I hope you know. One small kindness, one shared meal, one dog who refused to walk away can change everything." The ballroom was silent for a full 5 seconds after he finished. Then, without cue or music, the crowd rose to its feet. It wasn't the usual standing ovation. There was no roaring applause. It was quiet, respectful, and real. Keanu stepped down from the stage. He didn't take selfies. He didn't wait for interviews. He walked out through the side hallway, Atlas's collar still clutched in his palm. And somewhere, in the still corners of that crowded world, the man who gave him soup in 1984, was finally seen. The morning light spilled softly across the quiet neighborhood sidewalks as Keanu walked alongside Atlas. The leash was loose in his hand, but there was no need for it. Atlas stayed close, his steps steady and calm, ears twitching with every sound. The street was hushed, except for the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower. There was peace in the silence, but Keanu's mind was anything but still. Each footstep brought with it a memory, not just of Atlas's return or the man who had kept him safe, but of the deeper things, the unseen threads that tied lives together in ways we rarely recognize. Clarence had vanished like mist in the morning, but the impact he left behind lingered. Keanu hadn't tried to find him again, not because he didn't care, but because he understood. Some exits are meant to be quiet. Some goodbyes are the loudest when left unspoken. They turned the corner and passed a small park. A mother pushed a stroller nearby, and a young boy, no older than 6, ran ahead. The boy spotted Atlas, paused, then tiptoed closer with a cautious grin. Keanu knelt down beside his dog and gave a small nod. The boy reached out, gently petting Atlas behind the ears. The dog leaned into it, tail wagging slowly, eyes soft. The boy looked up and said, "He's nice. What's his name?" "Atlas," Keanu replied. The boy repeated it with awe, as if the name carried weight. Then he ran back to his mother, smiling. Keanu stood and watched them go. He looked down at Atlas, who sat beside him patiently, ears perked and alert, as if sensing something deeper at play. "We don't always know why some souls find us," Keanu whispered. "But when they do, it's not by accident." They continued walking in silence. Keanu thought of Clarence's note, the one he'd folded into a leather-bound journal he now kept on his nightstand. Just a simple line, "Thank you for seeing me." The man who handed you soup in 1984, it wasn't just gratitude. It was a circle closed. A full story, hidden beneath decades of silence and suffering. Finai. As they neared the final block of their walk, Keanu felt the weight of what had passed, not as a burden, but as something sacred. He had gone looking for a dog and found a man who had once saved him. That man, in turn, had been saved by the very creature Keanu loved most. Life had conspired, quietly and deliberately, to make sure no soul was left forgotten. He turned down his street, the sun now climbing higher, casting long shadows behind them. Atlas slowed his pace, sensing home was close. But Keanu stopped for a moment longer, his eyes scanning the world with a different lens now, one shaped by connection, by grace, by second chances. Keanu reached his front steps and paused before heading inside. The door was open, the smell of fresh coffee drifting out from the kitchen, but he lingered on the porch, looking out over the neighborhood. He remembered the first night Atlas went missing. How lost he'd felt, how small the world seemed without that steady heartbeat by his side. Now everything had changed, not just because Atlas came back, but because he returned with a story that was bigger than either of them, a story that had reminded Keanu of something he often forgot in the noise of life. Everyone matters, even the quiet ones. Inside, he poured a cup of coffee and sat on the floor beside Atlas. The dog rested his head in Keanu's lap. There was no need for words between them, just presence, just peace. Later that afternoon, Keanu stood in front of a small camera set up in his study. His assistant had encouraged him to share the story, not for attention, but because people needed to hear it, needed to be reminded that grace still exists in unlikely places. He pressed record. "I wasn't going to talk about this," Keanu began, "but something happened that reminded me just how fragile and beautiful life can be." He looked off to the side, searching for the right words. "My dog Atlas disappeared. 2 days gone. I thought I'd lost him, and I would have done anything to get him back. But when I found him, I found more than just a dog. He paused, breathing in. I found a man I once knew, a man I had forgotten, and that man remembered me. Not because I was famous, not because of any movie, but because once, when I had nothing, he gave me soup and gloves. And I guess in the end, we both found each other again through a dog who refused to leave his side. His voice caught for a moment, but he pushed through. There are people out there who disappear in plain sight, people who gave everything and got lost in the cracks. But they're still here, they still matter, and sometimes they're the ones who end up saving you. He looked into the camera more directly now. Have you ever had someone return to your life when you needed them most? Someone you didn't expect, but somehow they showed up at the exact moment they were meant to. A pause. If you've had a moment like that, tell me in the comments. I'd like to hear it. And if you believe in second chances, share this. Not for me, but for someone who might be waiting to be seen again. He ended the video with a quiet nod, then shut off the camera. Outside, Atlas barked once, calling him back to the light. As Keanu opened the front door and stepped outside again, he realized something simple but profound. Sometimes, the greatest stories don't come from scripts. They come from the lives we almost missed, and the ones who refuse to let us forget them.